"Don't do it, sir," the young nanny whispered, and the millionaire changed his life. Richard Taylor held the pen so tightly, his fingers turned white. The document was there, on the mahogany desk in his office, waiting only for a signature to end it all. To finally bring peace to his home, his life, his days that seemed beyond repair. That's when he felt a presence behind him. The soft voice of Samantha, his son's nanny, came as a whisper that seemed to echo throughout the room. "Don't do this, sir. He just needs his father." Richard turned abruptly. The young woman stood there in her impeccable uniform, her blonde hair tied back, her light eyes filled with a determination he hadn't expected to see. Samantha was only 23, but at that moment there was something in her gaze that seemed much older, much wiser. "How dare you come in here without knocking?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. "And how dare you comment on decisions that don't concern you?" "I'm sorry, sir, but—" She took a step forward, her hands nervously clasped. "Ethan doesn't need to be institutionalized. He's not a problem to be solved by sending him away." "You don't understand anything." Richard stood up, walking to the window overlooking the vast garden of the mansion. "You have no idea what it's like to live like this, with a child who can't connect with anything, who screams all night, who breaks everything, who needs love," Samantha interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "Ethan is 6 years old and has autism, sir. He isn't difficult out of malice. He's trying to communicate the only way he knows how." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. There was anger there, an old anger from places he preferred not to explore. But there was also something else, something that hurt differently. "You're fired," he said without looking at her. "Get your things and leave my house, now." Samantha stood frozen for a moment. Then, with a deep breath that Richard could hear, even with his back turned, she spoke softly. "I just wanted you to know that Ethan drew something today. It's on the little table in his room. You should see it." She left before he could respond, closing the door with a care that seemed almost painful. Richard stood there, looking out the window without really seeing anything. The mansion in Upper East Side, New York City, had always been his pride. 3 floors of luxury, a pool, a tennis court, a garden that seemed endless. Everything money could buy. Everything except peace. He picked up the intercom phone and called Margaret, the head housekeeper. "The nanny has been fired. Arrange her payment and make sure she leaves today. And call that agency they recommended, the one that works with more rigid methods. I need someone who knows how to enforce discipline." After hanging up, Richard looked back at the document on the desk. The New Hope Center was located in rural Colorado, over 600 miles away. Specializing in children with special needs, it had an impeccable reputation. There, Ethan would have everything he needed: therapists, doctors, facilities, everything Richard couldn't provide, or so he told himself. Night fell over the mansion with its usual quietness. Richard had a business meeting in the morning, then needed to go to the club, had that dinner with investors. His life was an endless sequence of appointments that seemed important until he came home and saw his son. Ethan was in his room when Richard went upstairs. The boy was sitting on the floor, surrounded by building blocks, rocking his body back and forth in a movement he'd had since infancy. He didn't look up when his father entered, didn't seem to notice his presence. "Ethan," Richard called, keeping his distance. He never knew how to approach, always afraid of doing something wrong that would trigger a crisis. The boy didn't respond, kept rocking, his eyes fixed on some point on the wall that only he could see. It was then that Richard noticed the sheet of paper on the small table beside the bed. He approached slowly, as if approaching something too fragile to exist. The drawing was simple, made with colored pencils, the lines crooked as only a 6-year-old could make. But what it showed made something inside Richard's chest tighten painfully. It was a man hugging a small boy. Both were smiling, drawn with that simplicity only innocence could create. In the top corner, in letters someone had helped write, was "Daddy and Ethan." Richard sat on the bed, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. When was the last time he had hugged his son? When was the last time he had really looked at him, not as a problem to be managed, but as a child who needed affection? He couldn't remember. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped him out of his thoughts. Margaret appeared at the door holding a folder. "Mr. Richard, the young lady has already left. She left this here." She handed over the folder with an expression that tried to be neutral but failed. She said it was important for the boy's care. Richard opened the folder after Margaret left. Inside were sheet after sheet of notes, all in Samantha's careful handwriting. Each page documented a day with Ethan, small victories Richard had never noticed. "Today Ethan held my hand for 3 seconds when we went to the garden. Ethan ate by himself for the first time, without throwing the plate on the floor. Ethan looked into my eyes when I sang that song he likes. Ethan clearly said water today. I cried with joy." Page after page of moments that to anyone else might seem insignificant, but which Samantha had treated as monumental victories. And at the end of each note, she had written suggestions, activity ideas, things that could help Ethan progress. Richard closed the folder harder than he intended, startling Ethan, who finally looked at him. For a second, just a second, their eyes met. The boy tilted his head to the side as if trying to understand who that man in his room was. Then he went back to his blocks, and the moment passed. The next morning, when Richard came down for coffee, Margaret was already in the kitchen with a woman who must have been about 50. She had her hair pulled into a tight bun, posture as straight as a board, and a gaze that assessed everything around her with almost military precision. "Mr. Taylor, this is Mrs. Stephanie," Margaret introduced. "She comes from the best agency of specialized caregivers in the city." "Good morning." The woman extended her hand with a firm grip. "I've read about your son's case. I have 20 years of experience with difficult children. I can guarantee that in a month you won't recognize the boy." Something about the word difficult bothered Richard, but he pushed the feeling aside. "What exactly does your methodology include?" "Rigid routine, sir. Children like Ethan need structure, clear boundaries. No coddling, no exceptions. They learn that inappropriate behaviors are not tolerated." Richard nodded, trying to ignore the memory of Samantha's notes, how she called every small progress a victory, how she treated Ethan not as a problem but as a child. "You can start today," he said. Mrs. Stephanie went up the stairs with the confidence of a general going into battle. Richard went to the office, had calls to make, contracts to review. He tried to focus on work, but the sounds from upstairs kept invading his attention. First, it was just Mrs. Stephanie's firm voice establishing rules. Then came Ethan's screams, louder than Richard had heard in weeks. And then, silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that somehow was worse than the screams. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The days that followed established a new rhythm in the mansion. Mrs. Stephanie implemented her methodology with a frightening efficiency. Ethan had schedules for everything. Wake up at 7 sharp, breakfast at 7:30, therapeutic activities from 8 to 10, lunch at exactly noon. Any deviation was corrected immediately, with a firmness that sometimes made Richard wonder if he had made the right choice. But the boy was quieter. The violent outbursts had decreased. Ethan spent hours in his room, sitting in the same position, staring at the wall. Mrs. Stephanie said it was progress, that he was learning self-control. Richard wanted to believe it. It was during an especially hot afternoon that Constance, the cook who had worked in the house for more than a decade, asked to speak with him. The woman was almost 60, her greying hair always hidden under a white cap, and a gentle manner that had won over even Richard's closed-off heart. "Mr. Richard," she began, her hands nervously playing with her apron, "I didn't want to meddle where I'm not called, but it's about the boy Ethan." "What about him?" "He's not eating properly, sir. Mrs. Stephanie says it's stubbornness, that he'll eat when he's truly hungry, but—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "It's been 4 days now that he barely touches his food. He's getting weak." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "She's the professional, Constance. She must know what she's doing." "With all due respect, sir," the cook took a step forward, "Samantha always managed to get him to eat. She sang those silly songs, played little games, and Ethan smiled. He hasn't smiled once since she left. Samantha's name hung in the air like a weight. Richard hadn't thought of her in recent days, or at least had tried not to. But now, with Constance's words, the memories came back. Ethan laughing, while Samantha pretended the spoon was a little airplane. Ethan holding her hand while they walked in the garden. Ethan looking at her as if she were the most important person in the world. "That will be all, Constance," he said, his voice drier than he intended. The cook left, but her words remained. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He lay in the king-sized bed in his room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about things he'd rather not think about. He thought of his own childhood, in a big, empty house where his father was also always too busy. He remembered strict governesses who taught him that boys don't cry, that feelings are signs of weakness. He remembered growing up believing that love was something you bought with expensive gifts and good schools. He had never questioned that, until now. The next morning, while Richard was having breakfast alone at the table that could seat 20 people, he heard raised voices coming from the second floor. He went up the stairs 2 at a time, his heart racing with an anxiety he couldn't explain. The door to Ethan's room was slightly ajar. Through it, he could see Mrs. Stephanie holding the boy's arm with more force than necessary, trying to make him sit in the study chair. "You will learn to obey," she said, her voice firm, but with an edge of frustration. "No tantrums, no resistance. Sit down now." Ethan was screaming, trying to break free, his small body writhing in an anguish that was painful to see. Tears streamed down his face, his hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. "Let him go." Richard heard his own voice before realizing he had spoken. Mrs. Stephanie turned, surprised. "Mr. Taylor, this is part of the process. The child needs to learn—" "I said to let my son go." The tone left no room for discussion. Mrs. Stephanie released Ethan, who immediately ran to the corner of the room, shrinking against the wall, his arms wrapped around his legs. "Sir, with all due respect, if you interfere with my method—" "Get your things," Richard interrupted. "You're fired." "But—" "Now." Mrs. Stephanie left the room with heavy steps, her wounded dignity evident in every movement. Richard stood there in the middle of his son's room, not knowing what to do. Ethan remained in the corner, rocking back and forth, eyes fixed on nothing. Richard approached slowly, as if approaching a frightened bird. He sat on the floor, keeping his distance, just being there. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice coming out hoarser than he expected. "I'm sorry for everything." Ethan didn't respond, nor did he seem to notice. But after long minutes the rocking slowed a bit, and Richard stayed there, sitting on the floor of his son's room, trying to figure out how to fix something he himself had broken. The following days were chaotic. Richard cancelled meetings, postponed trips, spent more time at home than he had in years. But he didn't know what to do with that time. He sat in Ethan's room, watched the boy play alone, tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. It was Constance who came to him on the 3rd day. "Mr. Richard," she said, holding something in her hands. "You need to see this." It was an old cell phone with a cracked screen. "It's mine," Constance explained. Samantha has been sending me audio messages, stories for Ethan. She asked me to play them for him just once a day when no one was watching, said it would help him sleep." Richard took the phone, his hands trembling slightly. "How long has this been going on?" "Since she left, sir." Constance lowered her eyes. "I know it wasn't right to hide it, but—" The boy was so sad, and when he heard her voice, he calmed down. It was the only thing that helped. Richard pressed play on the latest audio. Samantha's voice filled the room, sweet and familiar, telling a story about a rabbit who was afraid of the dark. She used different voices for each character, made funny sounds, hummed little songs between sentences, and Richard realized he was smiling. But the smile died when Constance spoke again. "Mrs. Stephanie found out, sir. That's how everything got worse. She fired me, said I was sabotaging her work. She fired you." The anger returned, quick and hot. "Constance, you've worked here for 10 years. She had no authority to—" "I know, sir. But she said it was your order that there should be no more contact with the former nanny. I didn't contest it because I thought you—" Richard ran his hand through his hair, the frustration growing. How many decisions had been made in his name? How many things had he let happen by not paying attention, by always being too far away, too busy? "You're not fired," he said firmly. "Go back to the kitchen. And Constance, thank you for taking care of my son when I wasn't." The woman left with tears in her eyes, but Richard barely noticed. He was looking at the phone in his hands, at the dozens of audios Samantha had sent. Each one with a different story, each recorded with a care that was almost palpable. She hadn't forgotten Ethan. Even fired, even without getting anything for it, she kept trying to help from afar. And he had been too arrogant, too proud to see. Richard went up to Ethan's room. The boy was in his usual position, sitting on the floor, rocking. But when Richard played the audio, something changed. Ethan stopped rocking. His head turned toward the sound, and for the first time in days, Richard saw something beyond the absence in his son's eyes. He saw recognition. He saw longing. "You miss her, don't you?" Richard asked softly, more to himself than to Ethan. The boy didn't answer, but his eyes remained fixed on the phone, as if he could make Samantha appear just by staring hard enough. That night, Richard couldn't sleep again. He got up before dawn, went to the office, and turned on the soft desk lamp. He opened the drawer where he had kept Samantha's notebook. He read every page again, this time paying attention to things he had ignored before. She had documented not only Ethan's progress, but also her own observations about what worked and what didn't. She had done research on autism, had noted techniques recommended by experts, had created a full care plan, and at the end of the last page, handwritten in what looked like rushed writing, was a note that made Richard's heart stop. "Ethan isn't difficult. Ethan is doing the best he can with the tools he has. He doesn't need to be changed or fixed. He needs to be understood. And he needs to know he is loved, especially by his father, whom he watches with an attention that breaks my heart. Mr. Richard, if you ever read this, know that your son loves you, and he deserves to be loved back." Richard closed the notebook, his hands shaking. He hadn't cried since he was a child, since he had been taught that men don't do that. But there, alone in the dark office, the tears came without asking for permission. He cried for the childhood Ethan was having. He cried for the childhood he himself had had. He cried for all the lost moments, all the wasted chances, all the love he had kept locked away because he didn't know how to give it. And when the tears finally stopped, something had changed. A decision had formed, clear and inevitable. He needed to find Samantha. The morning brought a determination Richard hadn't felt in years. He called Margaret and asked for all the information they had about Samantha. Address, phone number, emergency contacts, everything. "Sir, she only left an address for a town in rural Colorado," Margaret informed him, bringing a registration form. "A small town called Hope Valley, but I don't know if she's still there." Richard took the paper, studying the information. There was no phone number listed, just the address of a street he imagined was very different from the wide avenues of New York City. "Prepare the car," he said. "I'm traveling today." "Today, sir? But you have the meeting with the Japanese investors at 3. Cancel it. And the charity dinner tonight? Mrs. Montgomery was counting on your presence." "Cancel everything, Margaret." Richard turned to her. "Everything I have scheduled this week. There's something more important I need to do." The car trip took almost 8 hours. Richard drove himself, something he hadn't done in years. Normally he had a driver for everything, but this time he needed to be alone with his thoughts. He needed that time to think about what he would say when he found Samantha, if she would even agree to speak with him. New York City faded behind him with its giant buildings and chaotic traffic. The landscape gradually changed, skyscrapers giving way to smaller towns, then to roads surrounded by greenery. The mountains of Colorado began to appear on the horizon, covered by the afternoon mist. Hope Valley was exactly the kind of place Richard had imagined but never visited. Cobblestone streets, low, colorful houses, a small central square with an old bandstand. The pace was completely different from New York City. People were walking more slowly, stopping to chat in the street, looking curiously at the imported car now passing through the narrow streets. Richard stopped in the square and got out, the address in his hand. An older man sitting on a bench pointed the way when he asked about the street he was looking for. "The Smith's house. It's right up that hill. Yellow house with a green gate." The climb was too steep for the car. Richard went on foot, feeling the strain in his legs that for a long time had only known the treadmill at the gym. The sun was setting, tinting the sky orange and pink, and for the first time in years, Richard stopped to really look. It was beautiful. Simple, but beautiful in a way that luxury could never be. The yellow house appeared at the top of the hill, smaller than he expected. The paint was faded in some places, the green gate needed a fresh coat, but there were flowers in the small front garden and white curtains in the windows that suggested care, even with few resources. Richard took a deep breath and knocked on the gate. A woman of about 50 appeared, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had the same blonde hair as Samantha, though with some grey strands showing and the same light eyes. "Good afternoon," Richard began. "I'm looking for Samantha Smith. I'm Richard Taylor. I know who you are," the woman interrupted, her voice not exactly cold but definitely cautious. "Samantha told me about the job. Please come in." She led him through a small but tidy living room, old but clean sofa, coffee table with a crocheted cloth, family photos on the walls. It was so different from the mansion that Richard had to make a conscious effort not to compare. "I'm Linda, Samantha's mother," the woman said, pointing to the sofa for him to sit. "My daughter isn't here right now. She went shopping in town. I can wait." "You can, but I think you'd better tell me first what you want with her." Linda sat in the rocking chair opposite, her hands folded in her lap. "My daughter spent days crying because of that job, Mr. Taylor. Crying for your boy, worried, unable to sleep properly. I won't let her be hurt again." The fierce protection in her voice made Richard feel something like admiration. "I know," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I know I was unfair to her. I came here to try to fix that." "Fix it how? By offering her job back?" There was skepticism in Linda's tone. "Because if that's it, you're wasting your time. Samantha won't come back just to be fired again the first time she disagrees with you." "No," Richard shook his head. "Not that, or at least not just that. I need her help. My son, Ethan, is worse than ever. He barely eats, doesn't speak, spends the whole day staring at the wall, and I realized that the only person who could reach him was her." Linda studied his face for a long moment. "You realized, did you? And how long did it take you to realize? After how many days of watching your son suffer?" The question hurt because it was fair. "Too long," Richard admitted. "I was arrogant, I was stubborn, I was a terrible father. But I'm trying to change, I'm trying to do better." "Trying isn't enough, Mr. Taylor," Linda leaned forward. "Children don't need attempts. They need certainties. They need to know they'll be loved consistently, not just when it's convenient for the parents." "I know." The words came out softer than he intended. "That's why I'm here, because I need to learn. And Samantha, she seems to know things about being a parent that I never learned." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That's when the front door opened. Samantha entered carrying shopping bags, humming a song softly. She stopped abruptly when she saw Richard sitting in the living room. The bags nearly slipped from her hands. Mr. Taylor?" Her voice came out in a surprised whisper. "Hi, Samantha." She slowly placed the bags on the floor as if in a trance. She wore simple clothes, faded jeans and a white t-shirt, her hair loose and falling over her shoulders. So different from the impeccable uniform she wore at the mansion, yet somehow more herself. What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you." Richard stood up. "About Ethan. About many things." Linda stood up too, touching her daughter's shoulder. "I'll let you two talk. But Samantha, remember what we discussed. You don't owe anyone anything." After her mother left, an uncomfortable silence settled in. Samantha remained standing near the door, her arms crossed in a defensive posture that was so different from the confident young woman Richard had known. "How is he?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Ethan, how—" "Not well," Richard interrupted, because there was no use lying. "He's very unwell, Samantha, and it's my fault." She took a few steps into the room but kept her distance. Did you sign the papers? Did you admit him to the clinic? No, I tore up the document the day after you left, but... He rubbed his face, tired. But I did worse things. I hired a strict housekeeper who treated Ethan like a problem to be solved. I let them fire Constance because she was playing your audio messages for him to hear. I stayed away for too long. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. The stories... Was Constance able to play them for him? Yes. They were the only thing that helped. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, turning her face away as if she didn't want him to see. Why are you telling me this? Why did you come here? Because I need your help. Richard took a step toward her. Ethan needs you. I need you. I need you to teach me how to be the father he deserves. Samantha laughed, but it was a humorless sound. You fired me, Mr. Taylor. You called me meddlesome, said I had no right to have an opinion about your son. And now you show up here asking for help, expecting me to just come back as if nothing happened. No, he shook his head. I don't expect you to just come back. I expect you to give me a chance to prove I've changed, that I'm willing to change. I came back to New York City with a better contract, higher salary, vacation time, everything you want. But more important than that, he paused, the words difficult to form. More important than that, I promise to listen to you. I promise to participate. I promise to be present. Promises are easy, Mr. Taylor. I know. That's why I want you to make a list of conditions, what you need from me to make this work, and I'll fulfill every one of them, I swear. Samantha went to the window, looking out where night had now fully fallen. She took so long to speak that Richard thought she would simply ask him to leave. It's not about work conditions, she finally said. It's about Ethan. He doesn't need another nanny, Mr. Taylor. He needs his father. A real father who's present not just physically but emotionally, and I don't know if you can be that. I don't know either, Richard admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. But I want to try. For the first time in my life, I really want to try. Samantha turned to him, studying his face with that intensity that always made him uncomfortable, as if she could see through all the masks he wore. If I come back, she began slowly, it won't be like before. You'll have to participate in everything. Therapies, playtime, meals. You'll have to learn his language, not force him to learn yours. You'll have to be patient, even when it seems impossible. You'll have to love him the way he is, not the way you'd like him to be. I accept. And you'll have to put up with me questioning your decisions when I don't think they're good for Ethan. Because I won't stay silent again. I won't watch him suffer without doing anything. I accept, Richard repeated. I accept everything. Just come back, please. The please seemed to surprise her, maybe because men like Richard Taylor weren't used to saying please to anyone. She stayed quiet for another moment, then let out a long sigh. I need to think, and I need to talk to my mother. She's sick, Mr. Taylor. That's why I came back here. She has some heart problems that need monitoring. I can't just leave her alone. Richard felt a pang of something that took him a while to recognize as shame. Samantha had her own problems, her own responsibilities, and he had shown up there expecting her to drop everything to help him. What if your mother comes along? He heard himself saying. The mansion is big, there are plenty of rooms. She could get medical care in New York City, the best specialists, and you could be near her while you work. Are you suggesting... I'm suggesting that both of you come live in the mansion. Your mother would have all the comfort and care she needs, and you could take care of Ethan without worrying about her. Samantha looked at him as if she didn't recognize him. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, he answered simply. And because I've spent too much time doing the wrong thing. She bit her lip, thoughtful. Richard could see the war going on inside her, wanting to help Ethan, but not wanting to risk getting hurt again. I'll think about it, she said finally. Give me your number. I'll call in a few days with the answer. Richard wrote down the number on a piece of paper he took from the coffee table. When he handed it to her, their hands touched briefly. It was just a second, but he felt something pass between them, a connection he couldn't name. Thank you for at least considering, he said. And Samantha, I'm sorry. For everything. I know, she replied softly. That's why I didn't tear up the paper. Richard returned to New York City with his heart heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavy because he wasn't sure if Samantha would come back. Light because for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The days that followed were different. Richard started spending more time with Ethan. He didn't know what to do, so he just stayed there, sitting on the floor of the boy's room, trying to exist in the same space as him without pushing, without demanding. On the third day, Ethan dropped a building block near him. Richard picked it up and held it, waiting. After long minutes, Ethan reached out his hand. He didn't look at his father, but took the block back and placed it on the tower he was building. It was little, but it was something. A week later, Richard's phone rang. It was an unknown number from Colorado. His heart raced when he answered. "Mr. Taylor," Samantha's voice was nervous. "I talked to my mother, and she agreed. We're coming." Richard had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. "Really? Really? But there are conditions." "Name them." "My mother will need a doctor to monitor her regularly, and a room on the ground floor because she can't climb stairs. And I want a written contract with everything we discussed. And I want—" She paused. "I want a real promise, that you'll make an effort, not for me, but for Ethan." "You have my word," Richard said, and for the first time in his life, he felt the real weight of what it meant to promise something and intend to keep it. "Then we'll see you next week." "Samantha," he called before she hung up. "Thank you, truly." "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Taylor. The hard work is just beginning." She hung up, and Richard was left holding the phone, a strange feeling spreading through his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as relief, as gratitude, as something dangerously close to happiness. The week passed in a frenzy of preparations. Richard converted one of the ground floor rooms into a comfortable space for Linda, with a hospital bed that could be adjusted and all the medical equipment she might need. He hired a nurse to care for her, scheduled appointments with the best cardiologists in the city. For Samantha, he prepared the room next to Ethan's, but this time without the nanny uniform. He bought comfortable clothes, therapeutic materials he had seen in her notes, books about autism and child development. Margaret watched everything with poorly concealed surprise. "Mr. Richard, if I may say so, you seem different." "I'm trying to be different," he corrected. On the day they were scheduled to arrive, Richard was so nervous he couldn't work. He kept looking out the window, waiting for the car he had sent to pick them up in Colorado. Ethan was by his side, sitting on the floor playing with a toy car, oblivious to his father's anxiety. When the car finally appeared at the mansion's entrance, Richard rushed down the stairs too quickly, almost tripping on the last step. He opened the door before the driver even turned off the engine. Samantha got out first, helping her mother. Linda looked tired from the long trip, but her eyes studied the mansion with an expression hard to decipher. Samantha wore a simple light blue dress, her hair in a ponytail, and when her eyes met Richard's, she smiled. It was a small, cautious smile, but it was there. "Welcome," Richard said, his voice coming out more emotional than he intended. "Thank you for having us," Linda replied formally. "The pleasure is mine. Let me show you to your rooms. You must be tired from the trip." "Actually," Samantha interrupted, "I'd like to see Ethan first, if that's not a problem." "Of course not." Richard led them to the second floor. Ethan was still in the same spot, on the hallway floor, the toy car moving back and forth in his hands in a repetitive motion. When Samantha appeared at the top of the stairs, he stopped. Slowly, so slowly that Richard hardly dared to breathe. Ethan raised his head, his eyes met Samantha's, and then for the first time in over a month, he smiled. It was a small, quick smile that disappeared almost immediately. But it was there. Richard had seen it. Samantha knelt on the floor, opening her arms, and to everyone's surprise, Ethan stood up and walked to her. He didn't run, didn't throw himself into her arms like other children would, but he rested his head on her shoulder, stayed there for a few seconds, and to Richard that was more beautiful than any hug could be. "Hi, Ethan," Samantha whispered. "I missed you." And although Ethan didn't respond with words, his body relaxed in a way Richard hadn't seen in weeks. The tension he carried in his shoulders eased. His hands, always clenched in fists, opened. He was home. Because for Ethan, Samantha was home. Watching that scene, Richard felt something shift inside his chest. It didn't hurt. On the contrary, it was as if something that had been broken for a long time was finally starting to heal. The first days were about adjustments. Linda settled into the ground floor room, and despite her evident pride in accepting help, didn't refuse the medical care Richard had arranged. The nurse he hired, Mrs. Helen, was a kind 62-year-old lady who quickly won Linda's trust. Samantha resumed her routine with Ethan, but this time Richard was included. She didn't let him just observe from afar. She pulled him in to participate, taught him how to do things he thought he couldn't. "High five," she instructed, placing Richard's hand over Ethan's as they helped the boy paint. "Let him feel that you're with him, not controlling, but accompanying." Richard discovered he had much to learn. He learned that Ethan didn't like loud noises, that bright lights bothered him, that sudden changes in routine could trigger meltdowns. He learned there were ways to communicate that didn't involve words, that a look could mean, "I'm tired," and a specific hand movement could mean, "I need space." But more importantly, he learned to be patient, to wait, not to force. It was difficult. There were days when Richard wanted to give up, to return to his old life where everything was simpler. Days when Ethan would scream for hours and nothing they did helped. Days when Richard felt completely useless, unable to help his own son. On those days, Samantha was there. "It's not about fixing him," she would say, her voice always gentle but firm. "It's about understanding him. Ethan isn't broken. He just processes the world differently." "How did you learn all this?" Richard asked one of those difficult nights after Ethan had finally fallen asleep. They were sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea that Constance had made before leaving. The house was quiet in a way that felt almost magical, just the distant sound of rain outside. "I researched a lot," Samantha replied, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "After I started working with Ethan, I realized I knew nothing about autism, so I went after it. I read everything I could find, watched videos, talked to other parents in online forums. I wanted to do right by him." "It's not just that," Richard observed. "You have, I don't know, a gift, a way of being with him that seems natural." Samantha smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. "My brother," she said softly. "My younger brother had autism too. He passed away 3 years ago. He was 15, his heart couldn't take it. But in the years we had together, I learned a lot about loving someone who sees the world differently. I learned that different isn't wrong." "I'm sorry," Richard said, and the words felt insufficient. "That's why it hurt so much when you talked about institutionalizing Ethan," she continued, eyes fixed on the mug. "Because I know children like him don't need to be hidden or changed. They need to be loved, that's all. Real love, patient, unconditional." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard had so many questions, so many things he wanted to say, but couldn't find the right words. "I was never taught to love like that," he admitted finally. "My father. He was never present. When he was always critical, always pointing out what I did wrong. I grew up thinking love was something you earned by being perfect, by being successful. I never thought it could be unconditional. But it can," Samantha looked directly at him, "and it has to be, especially for Ethan. He needs to know he doesn't have to do anything to be loved, that he can have bad days, can have meltdowns, can be exactly who he is, and he'll still be loved." "How do I do that?" The question came out in an almost desperate whisper. "How do I show him I love him when I don't even know how to express it?" "By being here," she answered simply, "by not giving up, trying again every day. He'll understand. Children always understand what's in the heart." They sat in silence for a while longer, drinking tea, listening to the rain. And somehow that simple moment in the kitchen became one of the most important in Richard's life. Because there, vulnerable and lost, he was beginning to understand what truly mattered. The weeks passed, turning into months. The routine at the mansion changed completely. Richard cancelled more appointments, delegated more work, spent less time at the company office and more time at home. His partners complained, business associates found it strange, but he didn't care. For the first time, he had different priorities than money and success. Ethan was progressing slowly but steadily. He started saying isolated words, always when least expected. Water, when he was thirsty. Sam, to call Samantha. And one day, looking at Richard during breakfast, he said, "Dad." Richard had to leave the kitchen so no one would see him cry. But it wasn't just Ethan who was changing. Richard was too. He learned to read stories with funny voices, to play on the floor without worrying about wrinkling his expensive suit, to hug even when Ethan pulled away right after. He learned that small victories were as important as big achievements, and he learned gradually to forgive himself for the lost years. It was during a particularly beautiful afternoon that things changed again. Richard was in the garden with Ethan, trying to teach the boy to kick a ball. It wasn't going well. Ethan was more interested in the fallen leaves than the ball, but they were together and that was what mattered. Samantha watched them from the porch, and Richard realized he was doing that often. Looking at her when he thought she wasn't watching, noticing small things, like the way she bit her lip when she was focused, how her hands always found something to do when she was nervous, how her eyes shone when Ethan made any progress. He was starting to feel things he shouldn't feel, things that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect, and that scared him more than any risky business ever had. It was Linda who noticed first. She had recovered well with medical treatments, and now spent afternoons sitting on the porch, knitting and watching the movement of the house. "Mr. Richard," she called him one day, when Samantha had taken Ethan to a medical appointment. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He sat in the chair next to her. "My daughter is special," Linda began, without beating around the bush. "She's dedicated, caring, sees the best in people even when she shouldn't, and because of that she's been hurt before, trusted too much, loved too much, gave too much of herself." "Mrs. Linda, Let me finish," she gently interrupted him. "I'm saying this because I see the way you look at her, and I see the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. There's something growing between you two, even if neither of you wants to admit it." Richard opened his mouth to deny it, but the words died in his throat. He couldn't lie, not to that woman who had already been through so much. It wasn't my intention," he finally said. "The best things never are," Linda smiled slightly. "But I need you to understand one thing. My daughter is not an employee you can seduce and then discard. She has a heart, has dreams, has value. If you're going to do anything, let it be with serious intentions. Or do nothing. Mrs. Linda, I don't even know if she feels anything. She probably doesn't even notice. Or worse, she probably still sees me as the arrogant man who fired her. My daughter isn't blind, Mr. Richard. She sees how much you've changed. She sees the effort you make with Ethan. She sees the man you're becoming, not just the man you were. And that can be more dangerous than anything else. Why? Because she might start to believe. And if you're not ready to reciprocate, if you're not ready to truly love her the way she deserves—" Linda made a significant pause. "Then it's better to keep your distance, for her sake, and for Ethan's, who's already become too attached to both of you together." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Linda's words kept echoing in Richard's mind in the following days. He tried to keep his distance from Samantha, to focus only on Ethan, but it was impossible. She was always there, always part of every moment, every small victory, every challenge. And the more time passed, the harder it became to ignore what he felt. Things became more complicated when Patricia Morgan showed up at the mansion without warning. She was a well-known businesswoman in Richard's corporate world, a young widow who had inherited her late husband's company and ran it with an iron fist. Beautiful, sophisticated, the type of woman Richard used to date before Ethan was born. "Richard, darling," she entered the room as if she owned the place, kissing him on the cheek with overly expensive perfume. "I thought I'd never see you again. You've been missing all the important events." "Patricia," he greeted, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." I didn't announce it because I knew you'd make up an excuse, she smiled. But there was a sharp edge to that smile. We need to talk about the partnership proposal and about other things. That's when Samantha entered the room bringing juice for Ethan. She stopped when she saw the visitor, and Richard didn't miss how Patricia's eyes narrowed as she assessed the young woman. "And who is this?" Patricia asked, her tone casual but with poorly disguised venom. "Samantha Smith, my son's caregiver," Richard introduced, and saw Samantha blink when called a caregiver instead of nanny. "How modern," Patricia commented. "I thought you used uniforms for household staff, Richard, or does this one receive special treatment?" "Mrs. Morgan," Samantha spoke before Richard could respond, her voice polite but firm. "Everyone here receives treatment appropriate to their work. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to Ethan." She left with her head held high, and Richard felt a pang of pride. And something more, something resembling jealousy when he saw how Patricia had looked at her. "Pretty girl," Patricia commented after Samantha left. "You should be careful, Richard. You know how it is young, impressionable people working in a house like this. They might get ideas." "Samantha isn't like that," Richard said, his voice harder than he intended. "Of course not, darling." Patricia touched his arm, her fingers sliding over the expensive fabric of his suit. "But you know how people talk. A rich man, alone, a young nanny living in the house." She left the phrase hanging, the implication clear. Richard felt anger growing fast and hot. "There's nothing inappropriate happening in my house, Patricia, and even if there were, it would be none of your business." Her eyes shone with something that could be anger or amusement. Wow, hit a nerve. Interesting. Maybe there is something going on and you just haven't realized it yet. "What did you come to talk about?" The abrupt change of subject made Patricia reassess her strategy. She sat on the sofa, crossing her legs in a movement that used to distract Richard, but now only irritated him. "The partnership proposal between our companies," she began. "It would be good for both of us, but it requires you to actively participate in the market again. Dinners, events, trips, things you've been avoiding. I have other priorities now. Your son." It wasn't a question. "Richard, I understand you want to be a good father, but you can't stop your life because of a child with special needs. There are people to take care of that. You're a businessman. Your place is in business." "Ethan isn't a that, Patricia. He's my son, and my place is where he needs me." How noble. The sarcasm was clear. But think about it. What kind of example are you setting for him? A father who gives up his career, who hides from the world. Eventually he'll grow up and see that you sacrificed everything for him. He'll carry that guilt forever. The words found a painful spot, an insecurity that Richard still carried. Was he doing the right thing? Was he exaggerating, smothering Ethan with attention? "I think you'd better leave, Patricia." "Richard, now." She stood up, grabbing her expensive purse, her eyes shining with an emotion Richard couldn't decipher. "You're making a mistake. In a few months you'll realize I was right, and when you do, call me. I'll be waiting." After she left, Richard stood still in the empty room, her words echoing. Was he right? Was he being fair to Ethan, changing his life so much? Was he— Don't listen to her. He turned. Samantha was standing at the door, Ethan holding her hand. "You heard?" "Some of it. Enough." She entered the room, leading Ethan to his toys. "Mr. Richard, what you're doing isn't a sacrifice. It's love, and Ethan won't carry guilt. He'll carry gratitude for having a present father. How can you be sure?" "Because I saw the before," she said simply. "I saw Ethan when you were distant. I saw how he looked at you with that need in his eyes, waiting for some sign that he was important. And I see him now, how he relaxes when you're near, how he sometimes looks for your hand. You're not sacrificing anything, you're gaining your son." Richard felt the tightness in his chest ease a little. "Thank you," he said, "for saying that." "It's the truth. And Mr. Richard—" She hesitated. "That woman, she doesn't understand. She doesn't understand anything about what really matters." There was something in her tone, something that made Richard's heart race. Jealousy, possessiveness, or just genuine concern? He wanted to ask, but Ethan chose that moment to bring a book, pushing it into his father's hands. It was a silent but clear request. "Read to me." And Richard read with Samantha sitting beside them, and forgot about Patricia, forgot about business, forgot about everything that wasn't that perfect moment on the living room floor, reading about dinosaurs to his son, who had finally let him in. But the following weeks brought new challenges. Ethan started special school, and the adjustments were difficult. There were days when he came back exhausted and frustrated, having meltdowns that left everyone in the house shaken. Days when Richard wondered if he was really helping or just prolonging something inevitable. It was on one of these particularly difficult days that Richard found Samantha crying in the garden. It was late at night. Ethan had finally fallen asleep after hours of screaming, and she had stepped out for some fresh air. "Samantha," Richard approached slowly. "Is everything okay?" She wiped her tears quickly, trying to smile. "I'm fine, just needed a moment." "You don't have to pretend with me." He sat on the bench beside her. "It was a tough day for everyone." "It's not just that," she admitted, her voice trembling. Sometimes I feel drained. You know, I love Ethan. I love working with him. But there are days when it seems like nothing I do is enough. That maybe I'm not the right person for this." "You are the right person," Richard said with conviction. "Ethan wouldn't have come this far without you." "What if I'm not?" She looked at him, tears still shining in her eyes. "What if me being here is holding back his development? What if he needs someone more qualified, more—" "Samantha," Richard interrupted her, taking her hand without thinking. "Ethan doesn't need more qualifications. He needs you, your love, your patience, the way you truly see him. That's priceless. You can't learn that in any course." She looked at their intertwined hands, and Richard realized what he had done, but he didn't let go. And she didn't pull her hand back. "I don't know what I'd do without you here," he confessed softly. "Not just for Ethan, for me too. You taught me how to be a father. You taught me how to truly love. You taught me—" He stopped, realizing he was going too far, saying things he shouldn't say. "Taught you what?" Samantha asked, her voice almost a whisper. Richard looked at her, really looked. He saw the young woman who had entered his life and turned everything upside down. He saw the woman who had the courage to confront him when he was wrong. He saw the person who loved his son with a purity he had never known. And he realized it wasn't just gratitude he felt. "You taught me that it's possible to change," he finally said with certainty, "that it's never too late to be better." They stood there, hands intertwined, looking at the moonlit garden. They didn't speak anymore. They didn't need to. There was something passing between them, a connection that went beyond words, beyond logic, something that frightened as much as it attracted. It was Margaret who broke the moment, appearing at the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Richard, Mrs. Linda isn't feeling well. I think we'd better call the doctor." Samantha jumped up, her personal concerns immediately forgotten. They rushed to Linda's room, where the woman was sitting on the bed, her hand on her chest, breathing with difficulty. "Mom!" Samantha knelt beside the bed. "I'm fine, dear," Linda tried to smile. "It's just my heart reminding me it's there." "I'll call the doctor." Richard already had the phone in his hand. "No." Linda gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "I've already taken my medication. I just need to rest. And I need to talk to both of you." "Mom, now is not the time." "Now is the perfect time," Linda insisted, looking between the two of them, "because I don't know how much time I have left, and there are things that need to be said." "Don't talk like that," Samantha said, tears already streaming. "Dear, my heart is tired. The doctors have already told me. I'm living on borrowed time, and I don't want to waste that time leaving things unsaid." She gestured for Richard to sit down too. He obeyed, feeling the weight of the moment. "You two are fools," Linda began, her tone both affectionate and exasperated. "Dancing around each other, feeling things but afraid to admit them. Life is too short for that. "Mom," Samantha began, her face red. "Richard," Linda called him directly. "Do you love my daughter?" The silence that followed was heavy. Richard could hear his own heart beating, could feel Samantha's eyes on him. "Mrs. Linda, answer honestly. Do you love her?" Richard looked at Samantha, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear mixed with something that could be hope. "Yes," he said, and felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. "I do." Samantha made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She covered her mouth with her hands, tears flowing freely now. "And you, dear," Linda continued. "Do you love him?" "Mom, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is. Your heart knows. Now your head needs to accept it. Do you love him?" Samantha looked at Richard, and something passed between them. All the weeks together, all the shared moments, all the accidental little touches and lingering glances, everything leading to this moment. "I do," she whispered. Linda smiled, a deep satisfaction on her tired face. "Finally. Now, what are you going to do about it?" Richard and Samantha looked at each other, the question hanging in the air. What were they going to do? There were so many complications. Their work relationship, Ethan, who depended on both of them, the social differences that the outside world wouldn't let them forget. "I don't know," Richard admitted. "But I want to find out. If you want to, Samantha, I want to try for real." "Ethan," she said, the worry clear, "what if it doesn't work out? What if he gets hurt by this?" "Ethan will be fine," Linda intervened, "because you two will put him first, no matter what happens between you. It's not about whether it works out or not. It's about being honest with what they feel, about not letting fear steal the chance to be happy." Richard reached out his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Samantha took it. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they were made for it. "So let's try," he said. Slowly, one day at a time. "One day at a time," she repeated, smiling through her tears. Linda leaned back on the pillows, her work done. "Great. Now let me rest. And Richard," she called him as he was already leaving, "take good care of her. It's the only thing I ask of you." "With my life," he promised. "You can believe it." The next morning, everything seemed different but also the same. Richard still had work, Ethan still needed care, Linda was still recovering, but now there was something more. A silent promise between Richard and Samantha, a new understanding. They hadn't told anyone yet. There was no need, it was too early, too fragile, but it was there, growing little by little like something precious and delicate. The weeks went by, and with them came more changes. Ethan began to communicate better, using simple but meaningful words. Hungry when he was hungry. Tired when he wanted to sleep. And more often, Dad when he wanted Richard nearby. It was a small victory for many, but for Richard, it was everything. Every word from Ethan was a bridge being built between them, a connection he had thought was impossible. And Samantha was always there, guiding, teaching, loving both with a generosity that still surprised Richard. It was on a sunny Saturday that Richard decided to do something special. He organized a picnic in the garden, something simple, but that he knew Ethan would like. He asked Constance to prepare sandwiches, bought fruits that Ethan loved, spread a large blanket under the boy's favorite tree. Samantha appeared with Ethan, and the boy stopped when he saw the scene. For a moment, Richard was afraid he had overdone it, had created too much stimulation. But then Ethan smiled, that rare and beautiful smile, and ran to the blanket. "You did all this?" Samantha asked, surprised and touched. "I wanted to do something special. For both of you." They sat down, and for the first time, they were a family. Not in the traditional sense, not in the way the world would expect, but in the way that mattered. 3 people who loved each other, sharing a simple moment under the afternoon sun. Ethan ate his favorite sandwiches, then lay down on the blanket watching the clouds go by. Richard lay down next to him, and to his surprise, Ethan snuggled against him. It was Ethan's first spontaneous hug, the first in his whole life. Richard looked at Samantha and saw tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. She lay down on the other side of Ethan, and the three of them stayed there, a small island of peace in the middle of the chaotic world. "This," Ethan said suddenly, his voice clear. "Like this." They were the first complex words he had formed spontaneously, and he chose that moment, that perfection, to say them. "I like it too," Richard replied, his voice choked. "I like it very much." "Me too," Samantha added, her hand finding Richard's over Ethan. It was the most perfect moment of Richard's life, more perfect than any closed deal, any money earned, any success achieved. There, lying on the grass with his son in his arms and the woman he loved by his side, he finally understood what it meant to be truly happy. But life is not made only of perfect moments, and soon new challenges would appear. It was on an ordinary afternoon that Patricia returned, this time not alone. She brought a man whom Richard immediately recognized as Dr. Miller, one of the most renowned child psychiatrists in the country. "Richard," Patricia entered as if she owned the place again. "I brought someone you need to meet, Doctor. Miller is a specialist in cases like Ethan's." Richard stood up from the floor where he was playing with his son, immediate irritation rising. "I didn't ask for your help, Patricia." "I know, but I'm giving it anyway." She looked around with an expression that seemed almost like pity. "Richard, this can't continue. You living practically on the floor, playing full-time dad, letting your company go down the drain." "My company is fine. For now," Dr. Miller intervened with a professional voice. "Mr. Taylor, I understand your love for your son, but there are more efficient ways to handle the situation. Intensive therapies, specialized programs. You don't need to carry this burden alone." "Ethan isn't a burden," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "Of course not," the doctor quickly agreed. "But it's a big responsibility, one that might be better shared with qualified professionals. There's an excellent clinic in Cambridge." "No." "Mr. Taylor, just visit." "I said no." Richard took a step forward. "Ethan stays here, with me. I won't send my son away." "Be reasonable," Patricia intervened. "Ethan would have excellent care." "Ethan has excellent care here. He has love here. He has a family here." "Family," Patricia laughed, but it was a joyless sound. "Richard, wake up. That nanny isn't family. She's an employee. And you're confusing gratitude with—" "Finish that sentence and you'll never enter my house again." Richard's cold tone made Patricia stop. She studied his face, and something in her expression changed. "My God," she whispered. "You're involved with her, with the nanny. That's none of your business. It is my business when it affects your business, when it affects your reputation. Richard, do you really think the corporate world will respect a man who got involved with the maid?" "Samantha isn't the maid," Richard said, each word deliberate. "She's the woman who saved my son, and the woman I love." The silence that followed was broken by a noise in the hallway. Richard turned and saw Samantha standing there, having just come up with Ethan. She had heard everything. Her eyes were wide, one hand over her mouth, tears beginning to fall. "Samantha," Richard began, but she shook her head, turning to quickly go up the stairs, taking Ethan with her. Richard was going after her, but Patricia grabbed his arm. "See what you caused," she said. "You can't have this, Richard. You can't have both worlds. Eventually you'll have to choose. The company, your status, your place in the world, or her." Richard looked at Patricia's hand on his arm, then at her face, and for the first time he saw clearly what she was, a bitter woman who confused power with happiness, success with love. "I've already chosen," he said, freeing his arm. "I choose Ethan. I choose Samantha. I choose a life worth living, not just a life that looks good on the outside." "You'll regret it." "Maybe. But at least I'll regret something I chose, not something I failed to choose out of fear." He asked them both to leave, and they did. Patricia with an indignant expression, Dr. Miller just confused. After the door closed, Richard stood there for a moment, his heart pounding. He had said it out loud. He had admitted he loved Samantha, and not just to her and his mother, but to the world. There was no going back now. He ran up the stairs, going straight to Samantha's room. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. "Samantha, please, open the door." "Go away, Mr. Richard. I won't. Not until we talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about." He pressed his forehead against the door. "Samantha, please, listen to what I have to say." After long moments, the door opened. Samantha was there, her eyes red from crying but her chin raised in defiance. "What do you want? For me to say I understand? That I accept being your little secret? That—" "That's not it," Richard interrupted her. "It was never that. Samantha, I love you truly, and I don't care who knows, I don't care what they'll say." "But you should care," she said, her voice breaking, "because this will affect you. It will affect your business, your reputation. People will say horrible things, they'll—" "So what?" He took a step closer. "Let them talk. Let them think whatever they want. None of that matters more than you, more than Ethan, more than this life we're building together." "Richard," she used his first name for the first time, "you don't know what you're saying. In the heat of the moment it seems easy, but when reality hits, when you realize what you're losing—" "I'm not losing anything worth having," he took her hands. "I spent my whole life chasing things I thought mattered. Money, power, status, and in the end, all I had was an empty house and a son who didn't know me. You gave me something money could never buy. You gave me a family." "And Ethan?" she asked. "If this doesn't work between us, he'll suffer. He'll lose another important person. It won't fail." "You can't guarantee that." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I can guarantee I'll fight for it every day. That I'll do everything I can to make it work. Because Samantha—" He touched her face gently. "You're not just the woman I love. You're the mother Ethan chose. You're part of this family. And families don't give up on each other." She closed her eyes, tears still falling, but now there was something different in her face. Hope. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Me too. But let's be scared together. Okay?" She looked at him, really looked, as if searching for something. And whatever she saw, it was enough. She nodded, a small but real smile appearing through the tears. "Okay." Richard pulled her into a hug, feeling her relax against him. It was their first hug, true and complete, without hesitation or fear. They stayed like that for long moments, just existing together, until they heard a small noise at the door. Ethan was there, looking at them with his head tilted curiously. Samantha bent down, opening her arms, and Ethan came. Richard joined them, the three in a hug that seemed to seal something important. A promise, a beginning, a family. The following days brought exactly what Samantha had predicted. The news spread quickly through Richard's social circle. The successful businessman who had gotten involved with the nanny. The gossip was cruel, the insinuations worse. Invitations to events stopped coming. Some partners asked to leave the company. There was even a nasty article on a gossip blog, questioning Richard's sanity, suggesting he was having a nervous breakdown. But Richard didn't care. Or rather, he cared, but not enough to change his mind. Linda, whose health had improved significantly with the treatments, became a fierce ally. She confronted anyone who dared to make nasty comments, defended both her daughter and Richard with a maternal ferocity that was intimidating. "Let them talk," she would say, whenever Samantha was shaken by some comment. "People who never knew what real love is will always judge those who do." It was Mrs. Helen, Linda's nurse, who brought a different perspective one afternoon when everyone was gathered on the porch. "You know," she began, without taking her eyes off her knitting, "I'm 62 years old. I've seen a lot in this life, and I can tell you one thing. True love doesn't care about age, social class, or what people think. True love just is." "But the consequences," Samantha began. "There are always consequences for any choice," Helen continued. The question is, which consequences do you prefer to live with? The ones from following your heart, or the ones from letting fear decide for you? The simple wisdom of that woman who had lived so much stayed with all of them. And slowly Samantha began to accept not only Richard's love but her place in that family. It was during an especially difficult afternoon that everything changed again. Ethan had had a crisis at school, and they called to pick him up early. Richard was in an important meeting and Samantha went alone. When she arrived, she found Ethan curled up in a corner of the special education room, crying, while the teacher tried to explain what had happened. He was doing so well, the teacher, a kind woman named Julie, explained. But then one of the boys made a cruel comment about his father, about the situation at home. Samantha felt anger burning in her chest. Children were cruel because they learned from cruel adults. That boy had obviously heard his parents talking and repeated it at school. "Ethan," she approached slowly, "shall we go home?" He looked at her, his eyes red and swollen. "Boy," said Dad, and you ugly thing, Ethan managed to articulate between sobs. Samantha's heart broke. Not for herself, but for Ethan. He was being affected by the gossip, by the malice of people who didn't even know him. "Listen," she sat on the floor beside him. "Sometimes people say ugly things because they're confused, or because they don't understand. But you know what really matters? What's in here?" She touched his chest, where his heart was beating. "What we feel. And you know what I feel." Ethan shook his head. "Love," she said simply. "I love you. Your dad loves you. And we love each other. Is that ugly? Is that wrong?" "No," Ethan whispered. "Then it doesn't matter what anyone says. Our family is real. It's good. It's full of love. And that's all that matters." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then did something surprising. He threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tightly. "I love you, Sam," he said clearly. They were the first words of love that Ethan had spoken spontaneously, and Samantha cried, hugging that boy who had stolen her heart from the first day. When they got home, Richard was waiting, having cancelled the rest of his meeting, when he found out what had happened. He picked Ethan up in his arms, something the boy now allowed, and looked at Samantha. "I'm taking him out of school." "No," Samantha said firmly. "Ethan needs to learn to navigate the world, not be protected from it. But we can talk to the school, establish consequences for bullying, teach Ethan how to deal with mean comments." "But, Richard," she touched his arm, "Ethan will encounter cruelty his whole life. It's part of being different in a world that doesn't know how to handle differences. Our job isn't to hide him, it's to give him the tools to defend himself." Richard knew she was right, but it hurt to admit it. He wanted to protect Ethan from everything, from any pain. But he couldn't. No one could. "Okay," he agreed reluctantly. "But we're going to the school tomorrow. Together. We'll make it clear that we won't tolerate this." And they did. The next day, the three of them went to the school. Richard in his expensive suit, Samantha in simple but dignified clothes, and Ethan between them, holding both their hands. The principal received them with a mix of embarrassment and concern. Richard didn't waste any time. "My son is being bullied," he began. "And I need to know what the school is going to do about it. Mr. Taylor, I understand your concern, but—" "No buts," Samantha intervened. "Ethan has every right to be here and feel safe just like any other child. If the school can't guarantee that, we'll find another one that can." The determination in her voice, the way she defended Ethan like a mother would, didn't go unnoticed by Richard, or by the principal, who agreed to implement stricter measures against bullying. When they left school, Ethan let go of their hands and ran ahead a little, something he rarely did. He turned and smiled at both of them. "My family," he said. "Strong." And it was. They were strong. Together. But the trials weren't over yet. One afternoon, Margaret came to Richard with a serious expression. "Mr. Richard, there's a man at the door. He says he's Samantha's father." Richard and Samantha exchanged looks, surprise and worry obvious. She had never mentioned her father, and Richard had assumed he wasn't in their lives. "I don't want to see him," Samantha said immediately. "Let me handle this." Richard started toward the door. "No," she held him back. "Let it be. I need to do this." They went together to the entrance. The man waiting looked to be in his early 50s, with greying hair, simple but clean clothes. There was something in his eyes, a mix of shame and determination. "Samantha," he began, his voice choked. "What do you want here?" she asked, keeping her distance. "I heard your mother was sick. I came to see how she is. And you." 10 years, Samantha said, her voice shaking with contained anger. 10 years without a sign of life, and now you show up wanting what? Forgiveness? "I don't expect forgiveness," the man, Joseph, lowered his head. "I know I don't deserve it, but when I heard that Linda was having heart trouble..." His voice failed. "I couldn't stay away." "You managed for 10 years, Samantha spat the words. "When Lucas needed you, when Mom worked 3 jobs to pay for his treatments, when..." "I know," Joseph interrupted her. "I know I was a coward. I couldn't bear to see my son suffering, couldn't handle the pressure, so I ran, and I've lived with that shame every day since." Richard watched the scene, feeling Samantha's pain as if it were his own. He wanted to step in, send Joseph away, protect her. But he knew this was her battle to fight. "Your mother isn't here," Samantha said finally. "And even if she were, I don't know if she'd want to see you. I understand. But Samantha, please, just let me apologize. To you, to her. I'm not asking to come back into your lives. Just want you to know that I'm sorry. More than words can say." There was sincerity there, Richard could see. But there were also years of pain, of abandonment, of growing up without a father. He, more than anyone, understood what it was like to have an absent father. He understood the scars it left. "I'll talk to my mother," Samantha said finally, "but the decision is hers. If she wants to see you, I'll call. If she doesn't, you leave and don't come back. Understood?" "Understood," Joseph agreed quickly. "Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for at least considering." He left a phone number and went away. After the door closed, Samantha broke down. Richard caught her in his arms, feeling her tremble with silent sobs. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's all right." "It's not," she cried. "Why now? Why, after everything, does he show up now?" "I don't know. But you don't have to deal with this alone. I'm here." They stayed like that for long minutes, until Samantha calmed down enough to breathe normally again. When they separated, she wiped her eyes and made a visible effort to compose herself. "I need to talk to my mother." The conversation between Samantha and Linda was long and emotional. Richard stayed with Ethan, giving them space. When Samantha finally came out of her mother's room, she was pale but calm. "She wants to see him," Samantha said. "I don't know if it's a good idea, but it's her decision." "How are you?" Richard asked. "Confused, angry, but also..." She paused. "Also thinking about you and Ethan, about how you fixed what was broken, and wondering if maybe it's never too late to fix some things." "It's not the same situation." "I know. But," she sighed, "my mother is right about one thing. Life is too short to carry hate. That doesn't mean I'll forgive him easily, but I can at least hear what he has to say." Richard pulled her into a hug. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. Always." Joseph's visit happened a few days later. Linda received him in her room, with Samantha present, but Richard keeping a respectful distance. The conversation lasted for hours, and when it finally ended, everyone was emotionally exhausted. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. Linda didn't forgive Joseph immediately, and Samantha still carried a lot of hurt. But it was a beginning. Joseph began visiting regularly, always respectful, always aware that he was there by permission and not by right. And slowly, very slowly, some kind of healing began to happen. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. And sometimes real was better than perfect. Watching all this, Richard learned more about family. He learned that family wasn't about perfection, about never making mistakes. It was about trying again, about giving second chances, about loving even when it was difficult. It was during this period that Richard made an important decision. One night after Ethan fell asleep, he asked Samantha to meet him in the garden. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He guided her to a special place in the garden, where he had ordered something to be built in the last few weeks. It was a treehouse, small but perfectly built, with a gentle ramp so Ethan could climb up without any trouble. "It's beautiful," Samantha whispered, her eyes shining. "I wanted to make something special, for Ethan, a place of his own, where he can go when he needs space, but also where we can go together, a family." They went up the ramp. Inside there were comfortable cushions, some of Ethan's toys, and a photo of the three of them taken weeks ago. But there was something else, a small velvet box on the coffee table. Samantha looked at the box, then at Richard. Her heart was racing, barely daring to hope. "Samantha," Richard began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know it's early. I know we're still figuring out how this works. But I also know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You, me, and Ethan. A real family." He picked up the box and opened it. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring, a light blue stone surrounded by small diamonds. "I don't want you to be my employee. I don't want you to be just Ethan's caregiver. I want you to be my wife, my partner, Ethan's mother. Will you marry me?" Samantha had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide it seemed her face might split. "Yes," she said, her voice a mix of laughter and crying. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Richard placed the ring on her finger with hands trembling with emotion. Then he pulled her into a kiss, their first kiss, sweet and perfect and full of promises. When they separated, they were both crying and laughing at the same time. "Ethan," Samantha said suddenly. "We need to tell Ethan." "Tomorrow," Richard pulled her back. "We'll tell him tomorrow. Today. Today is just ours." And they stayed there in the treehouse under the stars, planning a future that still seemed impossible but was somehow happening. The news of the engagement caused exactly the stir they expected. Some people were happy, many were shocked, and some were openly cruel. But Richard and Samantha didn't care. They had each other, they had Ethan, and that was enough. Ethan, when they told him, reacted in a way neither of them expected. He was quiet for a long moment, processing the information in his own way. Then he looked at Samantha and asked, "You stay? Forever?" "Forever," she promised. "And are you my mom?" The question took both their breaths away. Samantha knelt in front of him, holding his hands. "If you want me to be, Ethan, it would be the greatest honor of my life." Ethan thought for another moment, then nodded. "I want to," he said simply. And so, in a simple and perfect way, they became a complete family. The wedding preparations were deliberately small and intimate. They didn't want a big social event. They wanted something meaningful, something true. They decided to hold the ceremony in the mansion's garden, with only people they truly loved and who supported them. Linda was better, strong enough to help with the preparations. Joseph appeared regularly now, and although things were still tense at times, there was a genuine effort from all sides to make it work. Constance was radiant, taking charge of the kitchen with renewed energy. Mrs. Helen helped where she could, always with a wise smile and words of encouragement. Margaret, who had initially been skeptical about the whole situation, ended up becoming one of the biggest supporters, helping Samantha choose the dress and organize the details. The dress. Samantha didn't want anything extravagant. She chose a simple, white, flowing dress that made her look almost ethereal when she tried it on. Richard, seeing her for the first time in the dress on the wedding day, felt his heart stop. She was beautiful. But more than that, she was happy. And seeing her happy, knowing he was part of that happiness, was more rewarding than anything he had ever achieved in life. The ceremony was small but perfect. Julie, Ethan's teacher, was there, some of the household staff who had become more than employees, Mrs. Helen and her husband, Joseph and Linda, sitting politely apart but both present, and Ethan, wearing a little suit identical to his father's, carrying the rings with a care that was almost comical. When it was time for Samantha to enter, she walked alone through the garden, not because she had no one to accompany her, but because she wanted to. She wanted to walk toward her future on her own 2 feet, by her own choice. Richard waited for her under an arch decorated with flowers, and when their eyes met, nothing else existed. Just the 2 of them and the promise of everything they would build together. The vows were simple but profound. "Samantha," Richard began, his voice clear and firm, "you entered my life like a hurricane disguised as a whisper. You forced me to see what I was missing. You taught me to love when I had forgotten how. You gave me back my son and gave me a purpose. I promise to love you every day, to always respect you, to support you in everything. I promise to be the man you deserve, not who I was, but who I am becoming thanks to you." Samantha wiped away tears before speaking. "Richard," she began, "when I entered this house, I thought I was just accepting a job. I didn't know I was finding a family. You showed me that love can be scary but also the most beautiful thing in the world. You showed me it's never too late to change, to grow, to be better. I promise to love you every day, the easy ones and the hard ones. I promise to stand by your side, challenging you when you need it, supporting you always. And I promise to love Ethan as if he were my own, because in my heart, he always has been." There were no dry eyes when they exchanged rings, and when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the kiss was sweet and chaste, appropriate for Ethan's presence, but full of promise for all the years to come. The party afterward was joyful and relaxed. Constance had outdone herself with the food, each dish made with love. Soft music played in the background, and when Richard and Samantha danced for the first time as husband and wife, Ethan insisted on dancing too, the 3 of them twirling together in the garden as the sun set. It was the happiest day of Richard's life, happier than any business success, any financial achievement, because it was real happiness, built on real love, with real people who loved him back. At night, after everyone had left and Ethan was asleep, Richard and Samantha sat on the porch holding hands, looking at the stars. "Mr. Richard," Samantha began, using the old form of address with a playful smile. "I think you can call me Richard now, Mrs. Taylor." She laughed, that sound he had learned to love so much. "Mrs. Taylor," she tested the name. "It sounds strange." "You'll get used to it." They stayed silent for a moment, then Samantha spoke again. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me in, for letting yourself change, for loving Ethan the way he needs to be loved, for everything." "I should be the one thanking you," Richard replied. "You saved my life, Samantha. You might not see it that way, but that's what you did. You saved me and Ethan." "We saved each other," she corrected. "All of us. That's what families do." And she was right. They had saved each other, each contributing what they could, building something beautiful from what were once broken pieces. The following months brought adjustments, as every marriage does, learning to live together not as boss and employee, but as equal partners, learning to share decisions, to compromise when necessary, to fight fairly when they disagreed. But through it all, Ethan was the constant. Ethan, who kept progressing day after day, who started saying complete sentences, even if simple, who learned to express emotions in ways beyond meltdowns, who, slowly but surely, was finding his place in the world. It was during a routine appointment with Ethan's therapist that they received unexpected news. "He's making exceptional progress," the therapist, Dr. Sophia, said with a smile. "Honestly, it's one of the most significant development cases I've ever seen. And do you know why?" Richard and Samantha looked at each other, then shook their heads. "Because he's surrounded by consistent love," she continued. "Because he has structure but also flexibility. Because you're both willing to learn and adapt. Because, simply put, he has what every child needs, a family that accepts him exactly as he is." The words stayed with Richard for the rest of the day. He thought about how, not long ago, he was about to send Ethan away. He thought about how he would have missed all of this, the progress, the rare but precious smiles, the perfect moments of connection. He thought about how a whisper had changed everything. "Don't do this, sir. He just needs his father." Samantha was right. Ethan needed him. But he also needed Ethan. He needed that special boy to teach him what really matters, to show him that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. And he needed Samantha, that strong woman who had the courage to challenge him when he was wrong, who had risked everything to save a boy she loved. It was on an ordinary night, a few months after the wedding, that Richard had an idea. He called Samantha to the office after Ethan was asleep. "There's something I want to do," he began, "and I want your opinion." "About what?" "I want to sell part of the company, a large part, and use the money to create a foundation." Samantha looked at him curiously. "What kind of foundation?" "For families with autistic children, especially low-income families who don't have access to the resources we have, therapies, materials, psychological support, all for free. And I want you to be part of it. I want you to use everything you've learned with Ethan, with your brother, to help other families." Samantha's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, you would do that?" "I want to. There's no point having all these resources, all this experience, and keeping it just for ourselves. We can help so many families. We can make a difference in the lives of so many children." Samantha hugged him tightly, burying her face in his neck. "That would be amazing," she whispered. "Lucas? He would love to know that other children like him are being helped." And so began a new chapter. Richard sold 40% of his company, causing a stir in the corporate world. He used the money to establish the Ethan and Lucas Foundation in honor of the two boys who had taught so much about unconditional love. Samantha became the program director, working directly with families, creating support materials, training other caregivers. She flourished in that role, finding a purpose that went beyond just caring for Ethan. And Ethan, seeing his parents helping other children, began to understand that his difference wasn't a weakness. It was just a part of him, a part that made him special, not less. Ethan's first birthday after the wedding was a joyful event. For the first time, he wanted a real party, with other children. Samantha and Richard organized everything carefully, making sure it would be an environment where Ethan would feel comfortable. They invited children from Ethan's special school, some who participated in the Foundation's programs, and some neighborhood children whose parents had become friends. It was a loud and chaotic party, but in the best way possible. Ethan ran through the garden with other children, for the first time truly playing in a group. He laughed out loud when the chocolate cake was served. He blew out the candles with help, but he blew them out. And when it was time to take the photo, he insisted on standing between Richard and Samantha, each hand holding one of his parents. "My family," he said clearly for everyone to hear. "My perfect family. It wasn't perfect, not in the traditional sense, but it was theirs, and it was real. And it was full of a love that had been earned through hardships, forged through challenges, strengthened through every obstacle overcome." It was a few weeks later, when Richard was working in the home office, that Ethan appeared at the door. That in itself was unusual. Ethan rarely sought people out on his own. "Dad," he called, "I need to talk." Richard dropped everything immediately. "Of course. What is it?" Ethan came in, sitting on the floor as he usually did. Richard joined him, waiting patiently while the boy gathered his thoughts. Boy at school said, "I'm different." Said, "defective." The words came out slowly, but they were clear. Richard's heart tightened. "What do you think about that?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "I am different," he finally said, "but not defective. Just different. Like," he searched for the comparison, "like different colors. Not wrong, just different." Richard felt tears burning his eyes. His son, his beautiful and special boy, had understood something that would take most people a lifetime to learn. "That's right," Richard said, his voice choked. "You are absolutely right. And you know what else?" Ethan looked at him, those dark eyes so much like his own. "Your difference makes you special. It makes you unique. And I wouldn't trade you for anything in this world." You are perfect, just the way you are." Ethan smiled, that rare and beautiful smile that made every effort worthwhile. "You too. Perfect. My dad. Perfect for me." And of all the things Richard had achieved in life, those words were the greatest success of all, because he had achieved something that, not long ago, seemed impossible. He had become the father Ethan needed. He had learned to love without conditions, without expectations, without reservations. He had learned that the most important things in life cannot be bought or achieved through hard work. They need to be cultivated, nurtured, protected. And sometimes they need to start with someone brave enough to whisper a truth you don't want to hear. "Don't do that, sir. He just needs his father." Samantha had whispered those words, and it had changed everything. He had saved Ethan, yes, but he had also saved Richard from an empty life, had given him a purpose that went beyond profit and loss. He had given him a family. The years went by, each bringing new challenges and new joys. Ethan continued progressing, at his own pace, in his own way. He began to show interest in drawing, creating beautiful images that Richard and Samantha proudly hung throughout the house. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of families. Samantha became a respected voice in the field of autism, speaking at events, writing articles, sharing everything she had learned. And she always credited Ethan as her greatest teacher. Linda recovered completely, her relationship with Joseph evolving into something that, while not romance, was mutual respect and genuine friendship. She became a constant presence in Ethan's life, a grandmother who loved him unconditionally. Joseph found his own path to redemption, volunteering at the foundation, working with parents who were where he had been, scared, lost, tempted to run away. He taught them, through his own experience, that running away solved nothing, that staying, no matter how difficult, was always worth it. Constance continued reigning in the kitchen, creating meals that were more than food. They were love served on plates. Margaret eventually retired, but not before seeing Ethan grow into a confident and happy boy. And Mrs. Helen, that wise woman, continued being the voice of reason when everyone needed perspective. It was on an ordinary afternoon, a few years after the wedding, that Richard found Samantha crying in the garden. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of joy. "What is it?" He sat beside her, gently touching her arm. "I just got an email," she showed her phone. "A mother we helped 2 years ago. She said her son spoke for the first time today. He said, 'Mommy,' and she's so happy, Richard. She's so happy she can do something she thought was impossible." Richard hugged her, feeling the weight of gratitude and joy that message carried. "This is why we do what we do," he said. "For these moments, for these families." "And to think it all started with a whisper," Samantha said, laughing through her tears, "with me being nosy, challenging you in that office. It was the best nosiness of my life." They sat there, in the garden where so much had happened, reflecting on the journey that had brought them there. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when they wanted to give up, moments when everything seemed impossible. But they had persisted, together. And they had built something beautiful from what were once broken pieces. It was at that moment that Ethan appeared, running through the garden with a paper in his hand. "Mom! Dad!" he shouted, obvious excitement in his voice. Look what I made!" It was a drawing, but it wasn't like Ethan's other drawings. This one was more detailed, more elaborate. It showed 3 people, clearly identifiable as Richard, Samantha, and Ethan, in a garden full of colors, and above, in carefully written letters, was, "My happy family." Richard and Samantha looked at the drawing, then at each other, then at Ethan, whose face shone with pride and joy. "It's beautiful," Samantha whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "I'll hang it in the office," Richard said, "where everyone can see." "Are we happy?" Ethan asked, that simple but profound question. "We are," Richard answered without hesitation. "We are very happy." "Good," Ethan said with satisfaction. "I wanted to be sure because I feel happy, and I wanted you to too." He ran back to play, leaving Richard and Samantha alone again. They looked at each other, both with tears in their eyes, both smiling. "We did it," Samantha said. "We really did it." "We did it," Richard agreed. We built something beautiful, Samantha, not just for Ethan, but for us, for all the families we've helped, for... She interrupted him with a kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she said. I love you more than I ever thought possible to love someone. I love you too, he replied. You and Ethan. You are my life. And there, sitting in the garden as the sun set over New York City, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found what truly matters. Not success, not money, not status, but family, love, purpose, the things that make life worth living. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story of Richard, Samantha, and Ethan. Do you believe Richard made the right decision by accepting Samantha's advice? Have you experienced or know of a similar situation? Share your honest opinion in the comments. We'd love to know where you're following us from and what this story stirred in you. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories that bring reflections on family, love, and overcoming challenges. Thank you for your company.